This is the Module 5 skills test about analyzing spectra. And the first thing you're going to see is a animated image of a spectrometer. And this is the spectrometer, this little telescope looking thing. Notice that you can view this incandescent light bulb a couple of different ways from several different positions. I'm only showing position 3 here, where you're looking directly at the incandescent bulb. But you can also view it from position B, where you actually are looking at a cloud of low-density gas. And then there's also position A, where you're looking at the bulb, but the bulb's light is coming through the cloud of gas. So there's three different positions, and you're supposed to then, in question 1, determine what kind of spectrum you would see from each of those positions. So it's a little drop-down thing. Questions 2 and 3 then are essentially using various absorption spectra, and you're just supposed to make decisions about what you're seeing. You have to count the number of absorption lines you see in the spectrum in question 2, and then in question 3 it's a true-false question regarding the positions of the absorption lines on the blue end of the spectrum or the red end of the spectrum. And in question 4, sort of a similar question having to do with the temperature of the star and the relationship between the temperature and the number of absorption lines and the locations of the absorption lines. So that's pretty much the case for 2, 3, 4, and 5. Then moving on to question number 6, notice that here you're presented with a different way of showing the absorption spectrum. So notice you have the straight up absorption spectrum, which we're familiar with. Let me change the color of my line here. We're familiar with this already. But then we also have another way of presenting it, which is the intensity versus wavelength graph. And notice that the absorption lines, these areas, these dark areas in the absorption spectrum, that matches up with these little dips. The dips in the intensity versus wavelength spectrum. So what we're seeing is we get a little more information from this intensity versus wavelength graph, in the sense that we know that all the different colors are showing up, but they're not all at equal intensity. It turns out that, yeah, in this case, this star has its peak intensity kind of in the blue, with like the reds not nearly as intense. And so that's sort of the basis for the next couple of questions. You need to, in question 6, you have to compare these two stars and determine whether or not the peak wavelength, which is indicated by the dashed line, whether it's drawn in the appropriate position. And then finally in question 7, you have to do some matching. You have to match the position of the peak wavelength with the star of the appropriate temperature. So it's a drop down and you're matching the various stars with the intensity versus wavelength graph, particularly the position of the peak intensity.